friends and colleagues, shouting, what was abuse across the chamber at the time. That was tough, but I don't regret the decision.
Christian, you're very, very welcome on the New Statesman podcast. It's been quite an eventful few weeks for you.
I think that's a slight understatement, I think, really.
Can I just begin by asking you then, that moment, right before Prime Minister's questions, it's crunch time for Boris Johnson, and it takes everyone by surprise. We all see on our phones about 10 minutes before Prime Minister's questions begins, Christian Wakeford, the MP for Bury South, has defected to the Labour Party. And you walk into the chamber, you cross the floor and go and take your seat on the Labour benches. And then Keir Starmer welcomes you and draws attention to your defection. How did that feel for you?
If I'm honest, I think the biggest achievement I had that day was not throwing up on the back of Keir Starmer's head. It was trying to see friends and not see friends and trying not to make eye contact with anyone and just get through for a morning that was already a blur. I think it, as much as I hate cliches, but just for keep calm, carry on, we can get out, and then I can try and talk to people essentially. But at that moment, if there's ever a political rabbit in a headlight, I think that's how I felt at that time.
And did it feel right? I mean, I don't think anyone would blame you if you said it felt slightly wrong to be sitting with your erstwhile political enemy and facing these people who'd been your colleagues a few hours before.
It's not that it felt wrong. I'd been kind of working towards this decision, and it was more a matter of, when, not if. I think it was probably a bit quicker, but at that time it was just, okay, this has actually happened, and it was all just incredibly new. The fact that I knew I was front and centre, not only of PMQs, but probably the national news, certainly for a couple of days. It was really weird, and having former friends and colleagues, shouting, what was abuse across the chamber at the time, that was tough. But I don't regret the decision. I regret the impact it's had on a few people. But hopefully, as time goes on, that will fade. But I think I made the right decision then, and I still think that now.
The impact that it's had on other people, what exactly do you mean?
The hurt towards former friends. I mean, honestly, it's not a conversation that you can really keep them updated with throughout, because not only are they friends, they're colleagues, and they would probably also have a duty to to tell people. So essentially keeping everyone in the dark. There were sense of anger and shock and disappointment and and a lot of hurt, and I guess there's no good time to do this. And there is a lot of hurt out there, and I think if there's one thing I could change, it would be that feeling.
Have you had conversations with your former Conservative colleagues since then? And have you tried to explain? And also, I suppose, have any of them indicated that they feel similarly?
I've spoken to a few, especially the ones I was close with. By all means, not all the ones I want to speak to. Like I said, I'm aware there was anger, trying to reach out, but that may take time. But for some, I think the message I would say to those I've spoken to, or those that I still have to speak to, is I'm not asking you to agree. What I am hoping is that you understand that this hasn't come easily. It has taken a while, and it's taken a lot of soul searching, if anything. And I think at the start of this process, I probably had a lot more hair. For one, I certainly had a lot more sleep. But I've done this decision because I think it's the best thing, certainly for people of Bury South, certainly for me. I genuinely think it's the right decision. I hope they can understand that.
We'll definitely come back to the defection, but I'd kind of like to chart that entire journey, if I may. So can we wind the hands of time back a little bit, and sort of go into how you got into politics, I suppose, because you've been a Conservative member and an elected Conservative representative for quite a while,
Yeah.
actually. How did you get into Conservative politics? How did you know you were a Tory?
I actually told this story in a podcast for a local Jewish care home, and I went back to my old college for their what was it, World Book Day and Career Day, because I started my route to politics at college, where I studied for A level, and they asked me the question, "Why did you choose politics?" And honestly, I had no interest in politics at the time. I just had a friend who was in the same class and thought it would be great to have someone to go to the pub at lunchtime with. It turned out that I was, enjoying studying the politics, and from that moment, I identified, I guess, the ideology as to how I was brought up, which kind of resonated with me. So I guess it was more my past was conservative. So I joined the party in 2003. So 19 years, pretty much my entire adult life, until last week, was as a Conservative member. I've been elected. I've held senior positions, across the northwest, and then was elected as a member of parliament. I think from some of the things I've been campaigning on, some of the things I'm passionate about, I was seeing a government that wasn't actually doing anything really to address those. If anything, they were making it worse. So I think that's when I started questioning myself, and compromise isn't a dirty word, but I think I made too many compromises.
So when did that start? Because I've been looking through the Christian Wakeford back catalogue, and as you would expect from a Conservative MP, you've made some quite forthright attacks on Labour, calling the party out of touch, talking about its record on various things. And obviously you voted with the Conservative whip on pretty much everything, the way you would expect of a Conservative MP. When you were sort of talking about Labour being out of touch in the Red Wall, not being the party with a serious plan to get things done, at what point were you sort of internally wavering on that?
I think some of those comments were made certainly about and during the previous leadership. The pandemic changed a lot of things for a lot of people, whether it was the sacrifices we saw, the best and unfortunately the worst of Britain, where actually everyone clubbed together and tried to play their extra parts for not only their friends and neighbours, but actually the wider community. Why have we not had that before? I mean, it was almost David Cameron's Big Society. It just took a global pandemic to get there. When we got to the vote on free school meals, the first one, that's when I started questioning things. I mean, at the end of the day, it's never a child's fault, and all of a sudden we were saying, well, we funded it all up to this point, but no further. Well, what about these children who actually are going to starve, are going to have difficulties? And that was something I really wasn't comfortable with. To then have concerns, massive concerns about the Dominic Cummings fiasco, and I think at that point it wasn't just the leadership. When you were having ministers being wheeled out to support a decision that was essentially against the law, it was unedifying then, and it's unedifying now over partygate. We then had the genocide amendment to the trade bill, and the fact that why would we want to trade with a country that's committing genocide? The care cap cost, the cost of living crisis, universal credits. It's been a slow journey, but it's been one that ultimately kind of came to this realization. I mean, the thought that it's only about Partygate. I mean, Partygate's contributed to it, but there's been quite a few concerns for past 18 months or so.
Would you describe yourself as a socialist now?
I describe myself as a centrist who wants to do everything they can do to support those who are in need, for those who can't help themselves, and for those who actually do need help. And that's not just in the UK. That's across the globe. 0.7 is something I was passionate about, and I think we need to invest in other countries, because that's what global Britain should be about. We were world leaders previously in diplomacy and soft power, and it seems that it was a very easy decision to make to appease parts of the Conservative Party to say, actually, we won't keep to 0.7. There are many who'd like it to be zero, um, but it's wrong.
I suppose some people listening to this would think, fair enough, Christian Wakeford clearly doesn't share the values of Boris Johnson's Conservative Party. Wasn't happy with the free school meals vote, hasn't been happy with Partygate, the Owen Paterson scandal, hasn't been happy with, as you mentioned, the cut to the aid target, various policing amendments, and so on. But some of the rest of what you said would suggest that maybe you would still have a happy home in the Conservative Party under a different leader. But if David Cameron were leader again tomorrow, you would be uncomfortable there. Is that fair?
No, because I don't think it's just for leadership. I think it's what we've seen is a culture, and that's come from the leadership, but it's gone from the top through the party. I mean, the fact the party's not talking about cost of living crisis, I mean, they're not doing anything, not even talking about it. They weren't really, bothered, by the sound of it, about the universal credit cuts. That was seen very much as a financial decision to save £6 billion a year. It was wrong policy then. It's the wrong policy now. They've not cared about quite a few issues that for me are important. And I think of the mental health pandemic, which is going to be much more costly and much more serious than COVID. But that widens to drug and alcohol rehabilitation and addiction services, and they're barely even scratching the surface for that. And as someone who lost their own brother to alcohol addiction, this is something I'm incredibly passionate about, and it just doesn't even seem to be getting a mention.
Because the government is absolutely paralysed at the moment.
No,
Um,
I've been asking for details of an alcohol strategy for 2 years, and
mm.
we've not had anything.
I'm sorry to hear about your brother. I didn't realise that. So these are sort of the issues that you'd like to see a sort of serious party getting on with, and that seems to be part of why you're now a Labour MP.
Well, I
Um,
mean, there was the health and care bill, and
yeah.
for one amendment, I was the only Conservative who rebelled on it at the time.
Mm.
Um, and when you're the, when you're the only one, it kind of really does make you think, am I in the right place?
Yeah, so it's a question, it seems to me, of seriousness, of which party will be serious about changing people's lives and getting things done. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, to say, the concept of levelling up has been central to the government for nearly 2 years, and we still don't know what levelling up means. I mean, we're having to wait till next week, so February of 2022. The government's been in power since December 2019, and we're potentially then only finding out what levelling up means. We've got communities crying out for assistance. For me, it's education. It's putting more resource into skills and training and tackling literacy rates when we've got 9 million people in the country who either can't or struggle reading. That's what we need to be talking about. But again, we're nowhere near the table.
So we talked a little bit about how this has been difficult for you with your friends and colleagues or former colleagues in the Conservative Party. But I can't imagine you've had a necessarily easy welcome in Labour either. Certainly, you seem to have a warm reception on the benches when you moved over, but certainly sort of younger members and those on the left of the party have been pretty forthright that they aren't happy that a former Conservative MP with the voting record that you have, abstaining, for example, on the cut to universal credit, is now a Labour MP. One thing, so the chair of Young Labour, Jess Barnard, wrote a piece. I don't know if you saw it.
I've read the piece in the Metro.
Yeah, she has said, I was angry that this man who campaigned against our party and our activists and denied local people a Labour voice year after year could change his party when it looks to suit his personal ambitions. And then Boris Johnson in the chamber after Keir Starmer announced your defection, Boris Johnson said, Bury South was won under this Prime Minister, under this Conservative Prime Minister, and it will be Conservative again. So he thinks that you're less likely to be re-elected in Bury South now that you've moved parties. Do you think you're more likely to be re-elected as a Labour MP there?
I've not been thinking about a general election or anything. For the last couple of weeks, it's been kind of crossing the floor and just getting on with the work that I've been doing previously. I think, like you said before, when it comes down to a voting record, yes, I was a Conservative. I followed the Conservative whip, not all the time, but on the vast majority of issues. I think really now it's draw a line in the sand and judge me from what I do from this point forward. I mean, I've only had 2 votes so far. I think it's a lot easier to do when you're not being threatened, strong-armed, or given a promise that actually this bill isn't the right place for this amendment. When we got this future bill, that's the right place, and then the future bill comes forward, and there's nothing to actually address an issue, and there's only so much you can actually believe when you're still a newcomer. So I think it was all this eroding of trust that slowly built up, and can I go back and change some of the votes I've made? No, but hopefully I can make amends for them moving forward when I'm following a Labour whip. I mean, whilst I don't expect those on the left to fully greet a former Conservative, at some point to win an election, the Labour Party does need to attract those people who have voted Conservative. For those who have voted Leave, it might not be something everyone is comfortable with, but that's the only way that that Labour is able to win an election. Hopefully, this defection actually sends a strong message that if someone who is actually a Conservative MP can make that change, then actually someone who just voted that way can much more easily make that change.
Give us the insight then of a former Conservative Red Wall MP, because we sort of mythologise that cohort in the media a bit, that Red Wall voters are the sort of the coveted voters for Labour to win back. Boris Johnson is so proud of having won them, giving him that huge majority in 2019. Actually, as one of those Red Wallers, what are your insights into where Labour has been going wrong on that, and how it actually wins those people back in your seat?
I think it comes down to the pub test, and if you're in a pub on the Friday night, what are you actually talking about? So at the time in 2019, I'm not sure it was necessarily Boris who was winning people over, but more of the former leadership pushing people away. Between that and actually just this, the description of being bored of Brexit, I think the entire nation can agree that they were bored of Brexit after 3 years. So the notion that it will just be done and we don't have to talk about it anymore, that actually resonated with a lot of people. For the Red Wall, which predominantly did vote for Leave, I think they wanted to think that they could, trust the government to actually, deliver Brexit. And, we look at where Brexit's been delivered, and, I say this as someone who voted for Leave. We've now got issues over customs that, no one voted for, and that's become a glaring mess. We've got issues over the Northern Ireland Protocol that no one voted for, and that's a glaring mess. We're getting tariffs left, right, and centre, and it's not what people voted. And Keir has come out and made several statements that actually it's not a case of a campaign to rejoin now. It's just a campaign to make the best of the situation we're in. And at the moment, I don't think the government's serious about it. I think we got to the 31st of December on 2020, and it was seen as, well, we've achieved everything now, game over, and we'll crack on with something else. And we're all still dealing with a lot of this mess over a year later now. I think there was a lot of that, but I think really the one issue that really resonated with me was fairness. They wanted to feel like they were being listened to. They wanted to feel like their communities were being cared for and actually talked about. And whilst we've got a lot more regional accents on the Conservative benches now, we've not actually had a massive amount of delivery. We've had some government departments move into other areas of the UK. That's not levelling up. We've seen the changes to HS2, with Northern Powerhouse Rail. That's not levelling up. We've got a entire kind of swathes of the north, screaming out for investment, and we still don't have a levelling up white paper. It's kind of, I think they've been taken for granted.
You're completely unique now, having been a Conservative Red Wall MP and now a Labour one. Do you think that that sort of malaise about the Conservatives not really delivering on that agenda is shared by colleagues in those seats?
I know quite a few concerns when we got to the budget as to why some areas were getting funding, others weren't, and I don't just mean the now described blue wall against red wall. I think there were areas across the north who were saying, "Well, how are you getting this and I'm not?" And it almost seemed as if there was an argument every time something was coming forward. But leveling up is a lot more than just a shiny new building. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I've got two shiny new buildings. But it's about that kind of social infrastructure to actually make sure that you are safe in your communities. And what we've seen is that women and girls aren't safe to walk the streets at night. It's about being able uh, to leave school with a good qualification and get into a good job. And again, that's not the case for large areas of the country. And it's about the security of knowing that you can go one day to the next without having to worry about whether you can pay your bills. And again, we're going into arguably the biggest cost of living crisis that I can remember. And the government's not delivered for any of those three things. And I think really it's really beginning to show.
Some former Conservative colleagues of yours have described you as Christian Wokeford. I don't know if you've seen that. Um,
I'm aware of Lee Anderson and Jonathan Gillis.
what do you make of that? Does that offend you, annoy you, and is it a fair label? Do you see yourself as woke?
Well, I think if they're saying that that I'm compassionate, then I'll wear it as a label. I do care about those who can't help themselves. I do care about foreign communities who actually really need international aid. I do care about what's going on with the Uyghur or even in Ukraine, because I was there earlier this week. Again, the government's not got any of this right. So if they want to call me Wokeford because these are some things I care about, let them do it. They called me that before I crossed the
Mhm.
floor, so it's that was not a new one to me.
Mm.
It is what it is. Um, if that's the most original thing they can come up with, then I'm surprised they're not putting that in the white paper next week as well.
You so that's sort of not even really the sharp end of your experience with the Conservative Party in recent months, because you have also quite bravely gone on the record to say that you received threats from Gavin Williamson over funding for a school in your area to really back up William Bragg's allegations of blackmail by some Conservative whips and ministers. I gather you were maybe thinking of speaking to the police about that. I'm just wondering how big a problem you think that is within the party. The experience of colleagues with that, especially while we're still very much in the eye of a storm on partygate.
I'm aware throughout the last year when colleagues have we've all been chatting over either a particular amendment or a particular bill, and they've said, well, I've been told that if I don't do this, I won't get level up funding money, or I won't get anything through the railway restoration fund. It kind of builds not that level of fear, but the do I want to hold back my entire area for a vote, and especially when you're new and you've not really been able to build a relationship, with a whip, because for the vast majority of the last 2 years, most people haven't been in Parliament in person. It's all been via Zoom and WhatsApp. I mean, I've been aware of whips actually jabbing former colleagues in the chest and saying you're done. So I think again it's this culture that's bred from the top as to what is and isn't acceptable. I mean, yes, I know it's their job to get government business through, but you don't do it by threatening people. Now, if you can't win the argument by the strength of your argument, then it's a pretty weak argument.
Boris Johnson, at the point where you defected, was in a pretty vulnerable place. But strangely, it's a few commentators and other conservatives have suggested that actually your defection and seeing Keir Starmer and the Labour Party benefit from this crisis actually made them rally round him. And they certainly were louder in that PMQs than they had been the previous week. Do you think that you've, in a way, temporarily saved Boris Johnson?
I think like my move to the Labour Party, when it was clear it was when not if, Boris Johnson's in that position. People aren't talking about his legacy; they're talking about who's replacing him. Whilst 54 letters weren't met last week, I still think that's imminent. I think my fear, certainly before, was even if it did all go in, I think he'd survive. I
Mm.
still think there's a lot of loyalty on the government benches, and certainly from a 29 intake of that feeling of, well, he got me elected. I'm not saying it wouldn't be close, but I think he would survive. I'm aware of a few former colleagues as well who said actually people are rallying behind him at the moment. That may have changed slightly when he's now under police investigation. With more allegations coming out, and the much fabled Sue Gray report. He's running out of road, and he's running out of his brass neck to hide behind. It really is a matter of when.
Having been a Conservative MP, what would your sense be of who would be most likely to replace him when he goes?
I think this is part of the problem. That there's no obvious contender. I mean, people talk about the Chancellor, and yeah, he was popular at the height of the pandemic when you're handing out lots of money, and it's been a lifestyle. But when you're the first Conservative Chancellor, in generations to put up tax, that wasn't popular. There's been a lot of decisions coming forward that haven't been popular. You look at Liz Truss, and it feels like painting your face blue and shouting freedom is the way to become popular. And yeah, it works with the grassroots, but I don't see leadership there. When you go away from those big two, then where are you looking? I mean, if it's Nadine Dorries, then I'm emigrating myself. But I can't see where we find someone credible who's not tarnished, and actually can deliver for a lot of what people need.
Just a couple of final questions, Christian. I'm aware that we haven't touched yet on sort of the issue of anti-Semitism, which I know you care greatly about, representing Bury South, which has the largest Jewish population of any constituency outside of London. And I think I'm right in saying that you're chair of the all-party parliamentary group for the British Jewish community. That must have added an extra element to your decision to move to the Labour Party. And certainly you've been asked a few tough questions about a potential new colleague on those benches in Jeremy Corbyn. So if Jeremy Corbyn did apologise for his response to the HRC report, would you be comfortable sitting alongside him on those benches and being a colleague of his?
At the moment, I think it's quite clear that since, if I remember, I think it was October 2020 when the HRC report came out, he was told then what he needed to do. So after 15, 16 months, there hasn't been an apology, which to me says there isn't going to be one. So I think at the moment it's very much a hypothetical problem, but I think there has to be, that has to be the precursor for everything, and it needs to be sincere and well received from the Jewish community before anything else happens. Just this week, I joined a European Jewish Association delegation to Babin Yar in Kiev. ahead of Holocaust Memorial Day, and I think we all need to actually take stock and realise the hurt, the concern, the anguish that a lot of this has caused over the last few years, and that's not going to disappear quickly. But I know the JLM is in a much stronger place now. I mean, from where they were, pre-Keir becoming the leader, where I think 4% of members thought the party was a safe space, to where we are now, where it's 77%, and that's a drastic change in such a short time. It is part of a journey. I would hope that my own reputation within the Jewish community will actually help with that journey. Because my politics towards the community won't be changing. I still think they've been the most ostracised community in the country, certainly in recent years. So I'm more than happy to keep on getting involved with all communal organisations, whether national or local, to make sure that their voices are being heard, and they're being heard loudly.
A couple of final questions. So there was a YouGov poll after your defection, which found that 62% of people think that when an MP switches party, they should resign their seat and call a by-election. Why, as far as I can tell, are you not planning on doing that?
Well, I think at the moment the one thing most people would hope for is a 650 seat by election. If we're about to change, the leader of the Conservatives and ultimately the Prime Minister, I think it's the time we need a general election. At the moment, my main focus is on delivering for the people of Bury South.
Although I suppose, as you said, it looks quite likely that Boris Johnson will hang on if there isn't an obvious successor. Do you really think that people voted for you rather than for Boris Johnson and the Conservatives and so on? Do you feel like that mandate, that majority that you have, is really yours?
It's one of the smallest majorities in the country. But when I got elected at that time, I wasn't just elected to represent Conservative voters. I was represented to support an entire constituency. I know from speaking to people and just actually being out and about that actually people voted for many different reasons. Some voted for Boris, some voted anti-Corbyn, some voted about anti-Semitism, some voted for Brexit. Elections and polling are very, very complex. So I think just looking at one on the back of one story doesn't necessarily give us a fuller picture. But I think really when the Prime Minister himself wasn't even calling for a by-election, I think that says all we need to know on that one.
And then just finally, you've very recently joined the slightly weird and intense world of Labour politics, and people have been joking about your induction into CLP meetings and the NEC. And how have you found being a Labour MP? And what are you learning about this party?
I was more nervous about my first CLP meeting this week than I was going to a potential war zone when I was going to Kiev this week. There's a lot I need to learn about. The abbreviations for one. I'm just getting my head around GC, PLP, CLP, NEC, and everything. So just the terminology would be a start. But from last week, when it was very much kind of rabbit in the headlight with the majority of the not even just the nation, the world's media kind of focused on me. I mean, when I was being recognised in Ukraine and at Amsterdam airport, I kind of realised how far the story had reached. But I think really now it's just getting engrossed with the local party, and I have had my first CLP now. Meeting a few councillors later, we'll be speaking to the Jewish Labour movement. It's going to be a journey. It was a journey to get here, and it's this isn't the destination. This is kind of that first step on the journey, which will hopefully be quite a long one. As to being a fully fledged Labour MP engrossed in not only local politics, but local groups, and ultimately providing on a national scale.
Christian Wakeford, thank you very much for joining us on the New Statesman podcast.
You're welcome.